always thought depression was something that happened to other people. You know, especially being in a professional sporting environment, you know, any sort of excuse me, any sort of weakness gets covered up fairly quickly. So I think I had, you know, down moments, but just focused on the next training session or the next game, and you know, you're very much in this mindset that you're a winner, and you know, depression's for losers. That was how I used to think about it, and it's kind of funny how different I view it now, having experienced it.
We hear a lot about depression in the community. It's common, it's undertreated, and it's underdiagnosed. But there could well be a hidden epidemic of depression amongst men. And research from the University of British Columbia is explaining why and how the effects, if undiagnosed, could be far more drastic than expected.
We're fascinated with the younger fellows, how much pressure they were under in terms of having to achieve. So looking for really good grades, looking for a career perhaps before it was kind of emergent for them, in some ways looking for a career before they finished their degree, looking to compete, looking to be as successful perhaps as their father. And I guess economic, you know, challenges perhaps, you know, exacerbate some of that, but we were quite surprised at how young these men were and how they were really trying to make their way.
Caught up in the bubble of professional sport. It's a very fast-paced, exciting lifestyle. You're flying around the world, you're playing in packed stadiums, and then I think retiring, that transition from professional sport into the real world is kind of a high-risk period for athletes, and I think, you know, for me, it just magnified all the other issues, and I had to deal with them. I didn't have a choice, I think, because there wasn't any other avenue to push into the background.
How does a depressed man present differently from a depressed woman?
So they've often presented as irritable, as having anger management issues, as maybe having substance overuse issues. So in those kind of ways, the traditional generic screening tools for depression won't necessarily capture those elements of a man's depression, and we know they're strongly linked to depression.
Does it give you any insight into why male depression is underdiagnosed?
The sense that we got was that these guys oftentimes would present with very typical male behaviours. So, for example...
Should be right.
Yeah, should be right. I'm okay, I'm a bit stressed. They might be self-medicating with alcohol, but it looks like a college guy who's enjoying a young man's life and having a bit of party time.
Oh, I never, you know, it's funny, you wake up the morning after you've retired and there's no physios and doctors and strength and conditioning coaches and skills coaches and all the support staff that you have that all care when you're playing, you know, what you're doing, and you wake up the morning after you retire and you realise that, you know, no one really cares if you eat the right stuff or you train. And yeah, I really struggled. I put on a lot of weight, my sleep was affected, just all the sort of negative consequences of eating unhealthy food and not sleeping well and not exercising regularly. I had all of them.
So at one level, you know, men were being diagnosed with depression at half the rate of women, yet the suicide rate was 4 times that of women.
Is it true in Canada, as it is in other countries, that the highest completed suicide rate in men is actually men over 75?
We do see the highest rate there, and we see it's 9 times that of women. That disparity between men and women is quite high in the older age groups.
And you have some fascinating findings in midlife.
We interviewed the female partners of men who were either diagnosed with depression or self-identified as depressed. So it was fascinating talking with them about how their relationships played out at home. The majority of these couples, you know, there was a bit of what we call trading places, where the men weren't necessarily the breadwinners, the women often moved into those roles, and the men often didn't have, you know, high libido. Lots of things kind of changed in what we'd say were normal, or not normal, but traditional gender roles.
So they were switching their roles?
They were switching.
It's interesting. I mean, it shows that despite the fact that we've got good drugs, there's good psychotherapies, the effect of depression on families is still profound.
Profound. Absolutely. You know, I mean, we know that if you have a spouse who's got a depression, you're more likely to develop one yourself. You know that if you've got children in the house, then they're more likely as well to develop depression if there's a depression in the house.
And elderly men?
Elderly men, fascinating. We spoke to these guys about depression, and many of these guys had what we called, you know, cumulative losses. So over a long period of time had developed, you know, kind of losses that they would catastrophise about and ruminate on. And when we
Such
spoke,
as?
Work was the absolute catalyst for these guys. So it was often in regards to not having achieved as well as they might have liked in their career.
So regret kicks in.
Yeah, like looking back. And then even the guys who were still in work or part-time work and on the verge of retirement, there's limited opportunities for redemption, if you like, you know, to sort of to get some of the things that they'd hoped for. So it was very, very interesting because there'd been all this literature around bereavement and older men as being a cause, and for sure, but there's some grief and loss goes on with work.
That suggests they viewed retirement negatively.
Yeah, a lot of the guys were really uncertain about retirement, and I guess when we collected the data in 2009-10, you know, the economic, you know, hardship probably played into some of that, some of the uncertainty about can I live comfortably.
It can be difficult to tell the difference between normal emotions in response to a distressing situation and depression. In general, that divide is measured by how long the sadness lasts, whether it seriously impacts on your life, and how much it impairs your ability to function. So what sort of time frames for getting help are we talking about?
Most of the literature we have suggests that about 2 weeks is a good benchmark for something that's really persisting versus something that's a bit of a problem. So most of us have the experience of, for a few days, you feel like you're not coping so well, or you're really struggling with work or in relationship issues, but you sleep, you cope, you talk, you do things, and you start to see the world a bit differently again. So a few days of distress is quite normal. If it is really persisting, typically over 2 weeks, you start to see major impacts on people's function, they're not recovering, normal forms of support are not making a difference.
It definitely happened gradually. I think in hindsight I've realised I was depressed whilst I was playing, but never to the point where the depression took over my life and I was able to bounce back from it fairly quickly. It was only when I retired that I think I really started to struggle. I didn't have that crutch of sport to distract myself with. So that was when I think I really started to spiral into chronic depression. I experienced some child abuse when I was younger, and you know, I think that was the underlying cause of my depression when I was playing and you know, when I was growing up. But I'd never really dealt with it, and I'd probably not accepted how much it had affected me. And I think that was just one of the ways that I'd coped, was just the next training session, the next game.
It is actually the chronically stressful situations which are much more likely to result in depression or persisting psychological disturbance. So chronic financial difficulties, really bad relationship situations. One has got to do with change in the environment. The other's got to do with the change in the ways that we cope with that. Now, in a lot of situations, people go for partial coping, particularly through our favourite antidepressants, alcohol, pain relief, other strategies that we prescribe for ourselves to try and get us through the day, to try and get us to sleep that night, to try and function the next day. And many of those strategies that people choose become self-defeating and may actually exacerbate the problem.
So it started off with, you know, I tell this story how my brother was selling chocolates for charity at school, and I used to wake up, so I had quite a bad facial injury when I retired, and had to have a titanium plate put in, and I was on a lot of painkillers and sleeping tablets. And I would wake up in the morning, sort of stumble through in this fog of being half asleep and on medication, and go to my brother's room and throw some money on his desk and grab a box of Freddo Frog chocolates. Sort of walk back into my room and spend the day in bed just sort of on the net and eating chocolates, and that went on for a while. You know, it's just not very healthy. I was telling a friend that story, and there was this pause on the phone. He said, that actually sounds like a pretty awesome day. It's probably not very sustainable.
What if if the trigger is not a one-off event, if it's something long-term like hating the job you're in?
If you're talking, for example, about teenage boys, you're talking about boys who might be very sort of socially isolated, who get more withdrawn, who stop interacting with their friends, do poorly at school, and then are abusing alcohol or often more irritable or kind of aggressive when challenged about those sets of issues. Typically when you move a bit later, into 20s, you see people who are withdrawing from relationships, not making contact with people, struggling at work, struggling to attend at work, and struggling to perform at work. Because depression is not just an emotional state, it's a cognitive state. It's hard to complete things, hard to get things done. With males in particular, the issue around irritability rather than sadness or tearfulness is often really important. Someone you're living with, someone who's not sleeping, who's basically up through the night, who's not interested in going out, not interested in sexual relationships anymore, not interested in enjoying or getting pleasure out of the things they normally would have got pleasure out of. They're the kind of things that you can see.
So if I notice a change in a co-worker and they confide in me, what do I do with that information?
The key research about that is not trying to solve the problem for them or with them, but supporting them to get professional help.
When I started having suicidal thoughts, that really scared me. I never acted on anything, but just the fact that I was having them, I think the first time you have it, it's easy to ignore it, but then when they start becoming daily, then that really did scare me, I think, into thinking, there's no hiding from this, you've got a serious problem. If you don't go get help, this could be the end of you.
It is a really important question in the whole of healthcare. How long do you wait? Well, the question is, depends what you've got. If you've got crushing chest pain, you're not going to wait 3 to 6 months.
So how urgently do we need to get them help?
There are many acute situations in mental health too. Someone's self-harming, their alcohol's out of control, they've got really serious suicidal thoughts. They may need to go to care now and get help now to get it under control. In other areas where they know they're struggling, but they think they may be able to do certain kinds of things, then the online environment may be a very good one to start. But always allowing that mental health problems, just like physical health problems, can go acutely badly. So you think you're struggling, and then something else happens, or today you really can't cope, and you really feel at risk. And this happens quite commonly, and it takes people by surprise. They think they've got it under control, but suddenly one Monday morning, they can't cope at all. They don't know how they're going to deal with the next 10 minutes. Or they wake up at 3 in the morning and they're acutely suicidal, and they've never been like that before. That's just like crushing chest pain, or suddenly not being able to speak or move part of your body. That's a medical crisis, and you need to go and get help. But if it involves ringing an ambulance or going to an emergency department, that is what you should do. You're just as entitled to get appropriate health care. Your life is just as at risk as if you had crushing chest pain.
So for people that are not at risk of harm but want some help to beat depression, how long should they wait?
Typically they then wait until there's an excuse to see the doctor. I've lost my job, my wife left me, and really important, because often when you go and tell a doctor that or somebody else, they go, oh, well, that's why you're upset now. Oh, well, it's not surprising. You've lost your job, your wife's left you. And that's where family and friends can be really helpful to say to the doctor or the psychologist or somebody else, no. We've come this week because finally there's a crisis this week which has forced us to get help. But actually, the problem has been running for 6 months, 12 months.
I was 29 before I told anyone that I'd had any symptoms or signs of it, and I think, I could have saved myself a lot of heartache and pain and suffering if I'd spoken about it earlier, but it's really difficult to do, and I think often it's people close to you can observe it. It just takes a bit of courage to sit down with someone and just acknowledge what is obvious to them.
The first thing that a person can do to help a person get information may actually be going online with the person first to help them get more information, find out about where they stand. Because when you go to a doctor and you've got information about yourself before you go, doctors say they don't like it, but that's not true. It's really helpful because your own expectations, your own explanation can be dealt with more effectively by that health system. So often going online to the depression websites, to the other information sites, finding out more about yourself, assisting the person, particularly with young people, to get information, understand the problem first. So the sequence might better be these days: online help, support from those who are close to you, seeing a GP, and then the GP referring you to a psychologist or somebody else accredited to get assistance. If that's not working, or if it's more severe or somewhat different, looking at providing appropriate medicines as well as that psychological support.
I went to go see a psychologist, and it actually was a lot easier than I was expecting. I think the tough the tough thing was admitting I needed to go and see someone. Actually going and seeing them and speaking to them about a whole range of different issues I was quite comfortable with that.
And then the key thing, like everywhere else in medicine, is to see what happens. Does it get better or not? When you engage the right kind of lifestyle strategies, reduce alcohol use, improve physical exercise, improve your sleep-wake cycle, get psychological support. And if not, there are then a range of other options. So there are different medicines, there are different psychological therapies. What's also really clear in this area now is the extent that if you have mental health problems as a young person, and that's where they start, 75% of mental health problems start before 25, and probably half start before the age of 15, you're going to have really bad physical health in midlife. You're at much increased risk of diabetes, obesity, premature death in heart disease, and that's a combination of the lifestyle things. People with these problems smoke more, they drink more, they're less physically healthy, but also their nervous system is driving their heart in a way that does damage to the heart, blood vessels, and to the intrinsic cardiovascular system over many years. So, it really matters to get this stuff under control for your physical and your mental health as you get older. And then if we look into the ageing area, you need to control these things in midlife to reduce your chances of premature death, but also dementia later in life.
I'd always been fairly conscious of eating good food and exercising, and I'd gone from someone who was at an elite level of fitness to being overweight and not doing the types of things that I enjoyed, with the training and the exercise, and just not being as engaged, and you're just not really there in the present moment.
And can men easily access help online without seeking face-to-face help as well?
One of the biggest improvements actually in the last few years, and Australia's been a world leader in this, both through private, not-for-profit organisations like the Inspire Foundation, through leaders in the area like Helen Christensen at the Australian National University in developing Mood Gym and other online tools, and also in the anxiety-based areas. The online tools are really good. But it's really the extent to which you do that persistently and make it part of your life that it works. And that's really true of the psychological and behavioural therapies. Again, they're not a course of antibiotics. You've got to learn to get unusual thoughts under control. You've got to learn to regulate your sleep-wake cycle. You've got to learn the importance of daytime physical activity to control your mood and these sort of dispositions or vulnerabilities that you might have.
So I haven't experienced any depression for a long time, and I think that's mainly down to all the lifestyle interventions that I've practiced. I think for me the main thing was learning about mindfulness. I'm kind of skeptical by nature, hearing about meditation and those types of things, until I actually understood the evidence-based reasons for practicing that and the science behind it. I couldn't really buy in, but clearly there's a lot more research that suggests those things are helpful. And practicing that was massive. I didn't realise until I tried to practice mindfulness how much noise was actually going on. And anyone who experiences meditation for the first time, I think that's probably the thing that strikes them, how difficult it is to actually just achieve that peace of mind. That was huge in terms of just turning off that constant voice in your head that sort of distracts you from being in the present moment. That was a major thing. And then I think just being able to talk to someone about the whole range of different things, having an outlet to express that rather than internalise it all.
Online tools really help with reinforcing doing those things. And increasingly, you can monitor how you're doing yourself. You can actually go back to the doctor again or to the psychologist you're seeing and say, hey, look, I'm only 60% better. Got to do better than this. And I think that's another thing I'd say, 60% is not good enough. You're only 50, 60% better. You're not going to have the job you want. You're not going to have the relationship you want. You're not going to have the physical health that you want.
And what's the role of self-help groups like Men's Shed?
Men benefit from socialisation just as well as women. They just don't discuss it. Now, with the decreased participation in lots of those formal sets of issues and changes in the workplace, a lot of men find themselves quite isolated. So it's great to see developments of things like the Men's Shed thing, where you can just go and do stuff and be in the company of other men while doing rather than talking, which allows that socialisation, that context. So in fact, men's sheds are one of the most important psychological developments that we've seen in recent years. And they respond directly to men's need to be in company, not be forced to sit around and have group therapy, not be forced to talk, not be forced to do things, but to actually participate and receive emotional support through doing.
So is depression lifelong, or are these treatments potential cures?
I think depression is best seen like something like asthma, right? People who get asthma have a vulnerability to asthma. Some people have chronic asthma, a small number. They've got to take treatment their whole life because every time they stop their steroids or their inhaler, they're back in hospital or their life, I say a lot of asthma, their life's at risk every time they have a severe episode. Okay? Some people have that kind of depression. It's the minority, but it's severe, it's chronic, they stop the treatments, they're suicidal, their lives at risk, their life's ruined. Others, much like with asthma, have the vulnerability, so they might have episodes, but what they do between episodes reduces the chance.
You know, when I compare it to what I was going through before, there's just no comparison. I think now I'm much more aware of listening to my body and listening to the signs and being proactive about that. So I haven't experienced any depression for a long time.